everyone. Welcome to the Thyroid Pharmacist Healing Conversations podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the root cause of eczema. I'm your host, Dr. Izabella Wentz, PharmD, your thyroid pharmacist. And today, I am joined by somebody who is, in my humble opinion, the world's top eczema expert, Dr. Sheila Kilbane. She's the reason that my little boy is eczema free. And I just really, really appreciate the work that she does in the world. Welcome, Dr. Kilbane. It's so great to have you here.
Isabella, thank you. It is my pleasure, and you are extremely kind. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So, Dr. Sheila Kilbane is a board certified pediatrician specializing in integrative medicine with a mission to transform pediatric healthcare by addressing the root causes of chronic childhood illnesses. She combines conventional medicine practices with evidence based nutritional and lifestyle interventions to help children achieve optimal health. In her North Carolina practice, Infinite Health, Dr. Kilbane developed the Healthy Kids, Happy Moms program, a 7 step approach designed to heal and prevent common childhood conditions such as eczema, asthma, allergies, reflux, and recurrent infections. It is really focused on the significant role of nutrition and lifestyle in children's health, as well as getting to the root causes. She's also the author of the book Healthy Kids, Happy Moms 7 Steps to Heal and Prevent Common Childhood Illnesses. And we're going to link to that in case you wanted to check that out. And I was really excited to endorse that book. And when it came out, I was like, we need to get this out in everybody's hands. She's a active educator and speaker, and just so happy to have you here with us, Dr. Kilbane.
Well, thank you. And when I do any talks or anything, we have an amazing team. So it's never just me. And we have an incredible, actually, a pharmacist. I wish everybody had access to a pharmacist. Deb Allen she helps create the programs that we do and does a lot of the research. So I always want to just make sure that I acknowledge everyone who's involved in what we do.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of meeting your incredible team, and you have really dialed in not just how to solve like complex patient cases, whether that's eczema or asthma, and really preventing that march from um, symptom, starting with one symptom and getting into other types of illnesses as you go, but also dialing in the patient experience. So, how to support a patient on their journey. I know when we started working with you, I was a very, very overwhelmed, sleep deprived mom with a very, very itchy little boy. And I had tried a lot of things and I had tried working with some local practitioners, but my son was still having a lot of eczema symptoms. And within working with you, within just a couple of weeks, I remember his eczema was like 80% gone. And instead of like, you didn't recommend like an intense elimination diet. He was already like a picky eater. And so I was like, I don't want to eliminate more foods. You gave me ways to soothe him so that we could actually feed him more foods. And I think I sent you a message where I'm like, he gained like 30 new foods since you started making some of these like root cause recommendations on how to address eczema.
Yes, and that makes me so happy even remembering all of these things because it was so fun to get your messages about this. And I also because we use the best of conventional and integrative medicine when we're treating eczema, and we work from the outside in and the inside out. And we also use a topical that was developed by an amazing dermatologist out of South Africa, Dr. Aaron. So his using his topical as a tool in addition to the integrative process is what allows us to have this it's these improvements on steroids. I mean, that not a good choice of words, but an improvement that are they're so fast. And when we use them together, it makes such a big, long lasting difference. So that when we stop some of the topicals, we don't keep getting the flare ups.
It's been really incredible to see you take, I guess, what I would call more of a conventional medical approach where you would use a topical approach with that integrative functional medicine approach. I know when I went to pharmacy school, it was very much, oh, like Aquaphor and Vanicream and topical steroids. And then when I trained in functional medicine, a lot of it was like, just work on the gut, just work on the gut. And here we're trying to do all this gut work with my, then slightly under 2 year old. And I'm like, but he's like so itchy. And a lot of the topical things we were using were causing essentially the itchiness to get worse, as well as some of that like eczema rebound when we would stop using them. But I love that you combine both approaches so you don't get that rebound, right?
We have to do that multifactorial approach, because with eczema, when it is so itchy, if we don't address that and we don't address the histamine, we that itchiness, the kids have bacteria under their fingernails. Just the act of itching disrupts the skin even more than what it is already disrupted, right? And so eczema is, right, it's a dry, itchy, scaly patches that we see on the skin, and it can be all over the body. It classically will be, on the inner insides of the elbows and behind the knees, but it can be all over. And this the significant how bad it is, right? There's a wide array. Some kids just have it really mild and we don't have to do a whole lot to shift. Some kids have it a much more significant case of it. And what I had been seeing is that in integrative and functional medicine is families would come to us and they had taken so many foods out of the kids' diet because they just wanted to get they that is how we learn it, is if the gut is inflamed or leaky, that's going to create the skin issues. But really, there's newer research that shows when we start to get the skin healed and address the dysbiosis of the skin, so that means all of those microorganisms that we have on the skin, just like the microorganisms that are on the gut, they talk to each other, they impact one another, and it's more like a two-way street versus take out all the foods that could potentially be triggering inflammation, and then the skin will get better. Is we have to do the two-pronged approach.
Yeah, I think that's such a wise approach. And I remember reading an article from the University of Chicago where they talked about how the food tolerance is related to the skin barrier. Like when you have a very permeable skin barrier, and let's say there's a child like eating a bunch of peanut butter out of a jar, and they get that, peanut butter under their fingernails and they start scratching their skin, some of that can get into their immune system, and then they can become sensitive or even have allergies to things like peanuts. And I just think it's so fascinating because we don't we in functional medicine we talk about leaky gut, intestinal permeability, but we don't talk about how important the skin barrier is for managing our immune system as well, right?
No, right? And it's that Dr. Peter Leo, it was actually he is, yeah, up in Chicago. I don't know if he did that original research, but he is the one who was doing a talk that I first heard that. And he talked about when, if the peanut hits the skin, that can actually trigger the food allergies and food sensitivity. And I was like, oh my gosh. Because it also, when you think about it, even the lotions that we put on, and I've had one, we at different times we've done mentorship programs, and at one point actually one of the practitioners in our program who does a lot of work with eczema, she had families who were using, it was a goat's milk top cream, like a nice organic goat's milk based cream, or it was either that or coconut oil maybe, and then they were developing food sensitivities to what was in the topical. So that's also why we're really careful of what we're putting on the skin, is because we don't want to trigger. That's why we need something very, innocuous, that's not going to trigger things. And it's always, because it can feel super overwhelming, right? When you're really tired and you don't know what to eat, you don't know what's triggering them, you don't know what topicals to use, you don't know how often to bathe them. And that's where in our practice, even the way that we, right, we make an Excel spreadsheet for people, is we just have to break it down one thing at a time. So usually that's all we do at the beginning, right? Is we use an antihistamine, and then we start the topicals. And then once we get the skin under control, then we move on from there. And I think histamine is such an important part of the puzzle here. Eczema is part of what we call the atopic triad, which you alluded to earlier. And it's eczema, asthma, allergies. And often kids with eczema will go on to develop asthma and or allergies and asthma. And about anywhere from 50 to 80% of kids with eczema or asthma also have allergies. So it's not only, and that's environmental allergy. So we know that and I'm throwing out a lot of stats here, but with eczema, we know that about a third of the time it can involve food allergies or food sensitivity. So that's not all of the time, but we need to pay attention to that as well. And it's the two big culprits are dairy and eggs. So we need to pay it, and it can be other foods, and it doesn't always mean those are the foods that are involved, but those are just two of the big triggers. And when it comes to environmental allergies, those are also a big issue. So once we we're always identifying those things, is we want to kind of put the fire out while we're figuring out what other pieces of the puzzle we need to address. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And just like reflecting on my own journey with my son Dimitri, it's like sometimes when you try to like look for all the root causes and the triggers, that can be really, really overwhelming, especially when you have a child that wakes up all night very, very itchy. And so, what are the things that you do to like soothe that child right away and help them be less itchy, help them sleep better, help them feel better? And so then you have a little bit more bandwidth and perhaps the more brain space to like investigate what else might be going on there. Now, I think you taught me, you have this amazing analogy of eczema and just atopy in general. And you described this bucket that overflows. And a lot of times people think it's genetics. My mom had asthma, therefore I'll have asthma. His brother has asthma, therefore, he's going to have asthma. Can we talk through some of like I just love your bucket analogy. It's just fabulous.
Thank you. So the bucket analogy was something that, and I'm going to just show you a picture. So I use it a lot in my book because I think it's really important to help families understand what's going on, because I think it's when you understand the why, it's a lot easier to execute, because it's a lot of work that we're asking families to do. It's not just one and done, right? We're going to use these things, and then we're going to gradually build up our cellular health and get the full thickness of the skin to heal. So when it comes to that bucket of inflammation, right, we've all got our underlying genetics, and it's the way that our genes interact with food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, infectious diseases, and stress, right? And stress can be physical, it can be emotional. All of these things contribute equally. So we can't just say we've got our genetics and that's what the outcome is going to be. What we do is we say, okay, we do have some underlying genetics, and maybe we've got a predisposition toward these allergy type illnesses. But what we can do is decrease our triggers of inflammation, and then we optimize our DNA, our genetic expression. And by supporting cellular health, like we always are talking, we think about everything in our practice on the cellular level. We need good, healthy cell walls, because if we're talking about the health of the skin and all of those layers, that is created, right, of millions and millions of cells. So we need good, healthy cell walls. And that also goes with the GI, with the lining of the gut. is we need really good, healthy cell walls. And then we need strong digestion so that we're breaking down and absorbing the nutrients into our bloodstream so that the nutrients go where we want them to go. But we can never be perfect in all of those areas of the triggers of inflammation. And Dimitri is a great example because we can only do the best we can when you have a child who's on the right. He's a smaller in build, and we don't want those kids to lose any weight. And if they're particular, and we say we're going to take out all of these major food groups, we don't want these kids to lose weight because we've got to think about brain development, physical development, right? Muscular development, fine motor development. And so we do things very gradually, and we just do the best we can in each area. And again, right, it's food, environmental allergies, environmental toxins, infectious diseases, and stress. And we just take each of those down as best we can, and you get this really beautiful transformative process. And you can start to see it's almost like the light comes on again is these kids when they feel better. And we just had this again recently with a 1 year old, and he was digging and clawing, and it was heart gut wrenching to see. And really, within about 36 hours of being on the topical and doing, continuing the antihistamines that he had been on, he was like a different kid. And you just look at the eyes. I mean, it was, of course, parents were over the moon. And we, in our practice, all of us get extremely excited at all of these little wins because it's life changing when you're not up all night scratching. And then you as parents can get off of Dr. Google because can see the results. And then we just proceed step by step.
Yeah, it was really, really game changing. So Dimitri, I was always gluten free and dairy free and organic with him. So it's not like he was eating like, trash McDonald's or something every day, but he was a bit of a picky eater. And I remember coming across a book on eczema, and it had this like really extreme elimination diet that I read the book and I just started crying because a lot of the foods on the elimination diet, it was like 16 foods and like half of them he didn't like. And I'm like, so I could feed my little baby 8 foods. And that's when I thought like there has to be a better way. And the amazing thing, so we mentioned a little bit about the topical skin barrier, and that's a big game changer because you can actually be less sensitive to foods when you fix your skin barrier. But there's also that histamine component, right? Where certain foods might cause reactions because you have a histamine overload in your gut. Is that right?
Exactly. And what happens is when we've got a microbiome on our skin, and kids, adults, people with eczema have a higher bacterial count, including staph bacteria. And that staph secretes something called a delta toxin. And part of what creates the flare ups is that this staph bacteria is secreting this delta toxin, and it's creating the skin flares, it's creating the gut inflammation. And all of that also creates more histamine in the body, in addition to if you're eating foods that you're allergic to or you're getting exposed to environmental allergies. And when the histamine levels are up, it not only creates watery, itchy eyes, but it's itchy skin, and it it contributes to the leakiness in the gut, so that inflammation that we see in the gut. Histamine also acts as an excitatory neurotransmitter. So that's part of why trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, mood swings, when the skin is out of control. And we can see this also with a lot of other issues is during the spring and the fall when allergy season acts up. If we don't have the histamine levels well controlled, their moods can go up and down in the spring and the fall. So it's always thinking. One of our first go-tos when we hear things like that of meltdowns and irritability, trouble sleeping, is we're going to talk about histamine first and foremost.
It's just so fascinating because I think a lot of people think of histamine as something is that's related to allergies, right? But it's actually a neurotransmitter as well. And so that can impact irritability and even make kids less hungry and not sleepy. And I remember Dimitri, he was always very talkative and he was like, "Mommy, I am never tired and I am never hungry." And, once we got his eczema under control, like, he was so much more calm overall, and his appetite got better too, and it's just so fascinating how it's all connected. Because I think I've talked to some parents and have seen some parents that are like, "Oh my gosh, my child is a picky eater, they have eczema, they have asthma, they're really irritable, and then they have, all of these other symptoms going on," and it's like, sort of like, "Okay, what is going on here?" And when you draw like a Venn diagram and what's in that middle, it's histamine, right?
It's such a profound shift when you put all the pieces together. And there are, because a lot of times we're always like, I will see families after they've been to a lot of different practitioners, and so sometimes parents are very reluctant to use, whether it's a regular antihistamine, whether it's prescription or even some of the topicals that we use. But it's we have to put that fire out, and that's part of controlling that histamine, is putting out the fire so that we can begin to heal, because otherwise we're chasing our tails. And that's the one of the best examples I can think of with histamine, is that we just keep chasing our tails if we're not able to bring the histamine levels down.
So I know there's a few different ways to bring histamine levels down. So let's say you can take a Benadryl over the counter, you can take quercetin, you can take some DAO enzymes, right? Do you have some? And I know I think I know this answer, but do you have some go tos that you might use as a prescription or perhaps to parents if they're listening at home, how they can help support their children in reducing histamine levels to start that healing process?
Yes, absolutely. We in our practice we use a compounded antihistamine, but that it's called ketotifen. But at home, what you can use is just regular diphenhydramine. And I do love, there's a company called Genexa, and they make a really clean diphenhydramine, which is the active component of Benadryl. Or you could do a dye-free Benadryl. And we're not going to say get on this and take it forever. We're going to say, let's get on this, a few days, maybe a week. Let's see how that is. And then we're going to do like dye-free Zyrtec is one that you can use during the day. So at the beginning, we may be doing a stronger one, right? Because the Benadryl is more sedating and it can help the kids sleep. And then we'll do the Zyrtec in the morning to control it during the day. And so we'll use that at the beginning. And if you're at home, right, always talk to your pediatrician, but that's what I do in the practice. And then eventually we shift so that the kids were using more of the quercetin, stinging nettle, vitamin C, some of these other more natural products that help control histamine. And the DAO enzyme is another. We don't use that as often. That can be helpful, I think, because we start with a stronger, right, the prescription antihistamines. We're usually able to move on more toward the quercetin and vitamin C, along with the anti inflammatory fats. All of these are going to help create stable cell walls so that the histamine doesn't as easily get triggered out of the cell and, systemic to where it creates all of the issues.
And that makes so much sense. And I know, speaking from personal experience of having hives, my aunt was like, "Here's some quercetin." And I was like, I'm going to pass on this. Let me get some Benadryl because it's going to work so much better, right? But the goal is not for kids to be on this forever. Because I know sometimes people are concerned about utilizing antihistamines long term. They produce sedation long term. And of course, in the elderly, this is not recommended because of cognitive issues. But the goal is this is going to be one step. And then we're also going to move on to additional steps where we figure out what to do with the skin. Now, I know you use a protocol called the Aaron protocol. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Why does that work so well? And perhaps if there's things people can do at home too.
Mhm. So, Dr. Aaron, who has become a dear friend, I just adore him. Brilliant, brilliant dermatologist out of South Africa. He's in his 80s now, and we've done, some talks and things that you can find on our website if anybody is interested in hearing more. So he started recognizing years ago that there was an infectious component to eczema and this staph back. So he basically figured out and treated what what research is now showing us, that that staph bacteria is part of what's creating the leaky gut and worsening the food sensitivities and the food allergies. So this topical is, it's a small amount of a prescription antibiotic, a small amount of a prescription steroid, and then a whole lot of Vanny cream, or a moisturizer. He recommends Vanny cream. And so it's a very dilute topical, and it's the frequency of applications, right? We start off with 4 times a day for a week, then 3 times a day for a week, then twice a day for a week, and then once a day for a week. And then at that point, often we need to do it once or twice a day for several months until we're able to work through the gut part of it and the cellular health, right? So we're always strengthening the cell wall, making sure we've got a nice mobile cell wall that nutrients can go in and out of it. And we've got to bring the inflammation down in the gut, because when the gut is very inflamed, like you can look at your kids, whether they have eczema, asthma, allergies, is they may have kind of pale skin, dark circles under their eyes, they might be mouth breathing and snoring, and they may have constipation or loose stools. And all of those things mean they have some inflammation in the gut. So they're not breaking down and absorbing their nutrients as effectively and efficiently as they could be. So that's why and this is again where Deb Allen, our integrative pharmacist, she is the mother of a 20-year-old triplets, and she saw the method that we developed together, and the supplements and the way that we do it was how she did it with her babies when they were premature triplets. And so she had to do things very slowly. And so it's always about, and we really always try to only change one variable at a time. Yes, we do the antihistamine and the Dr. Aaron, but when as we're using the Dr. Aaron and getting that started, the goal is not to be on it long term. The goal is to use it and get the gut and the cells back to where they need to be, figure out whatever triggers of inflammation there are, and then eventually wean off of it. But when you think about, I always talk about eczema similar to asthma, is with asthma, we know the research has been out for years that we want to prevent these big asthma flare ups. Because when you do that, it's a lot of inflammation in the lungs, and that can ultimately cause something called remodeling in the lungs. And so if you have a lot of asthma attacks and you're having to do oral steroids, when you're 14, 15, 25, you may not have the same lung capacity that you had when you were younger. And so it's with eczema, it's all about getting it under control and then keeping it under control. We don't want to Sometimes people don't want to use the topical because they want to see they want to get off of it as quickly as possible, but we temper that. We say, we've got to get that full thickness to heal, and each time it flares up, it's kind of like a sprained ankle that we keep respraining. So we just have to keep that inflammation under bay.
I really appreciate you sharing this perspective because I know some people, and myself included, are skeptical of using steroids on eczema because they can thin your skin and they can cause rebound. But with this protocol, you're doing a tiny, tiny dose of steroid in a moisturizing cream base. And you're also adding the antibiotic, which heals the staph, right? So it heals kind of like what's triggering the eczema, and you're also not going to be on this forever because then you're going to be doing the lifestyle changes and the gut work, but you're just really calming down. First you're calming down the histamines, but you're also calming down the skin with this protocol. And it's very, very effective. Now, I know that this is something that is a prescription item. Are there things that you recommend for patients if they perhaps don't have access to a prescribing pediatrician that is well versed in this protocol just yet?
Yes, absolutely. So there's we have what we call our eczema jumpstart bundle, and we use a topical called Briotech, which is it's hypochlorous acid. And again, I'm keep referring to Deb, but Deb had found this during the pandemic because we wanted something natural that would have antiviral properties. And this hypochlorous acid is something that the white blood cells make. It's completely natural. It doesn't sting. It was originally developed to help patients with burns. And it it you can start to use if it's extremely severe eczema, you should be working with a practitioner. But if it's a more mild case, this may be plenty to work through it. And there are a lot of companies that have ultimately realized this. So it's marketed in a lot of different ways, but the one that we use in our practice because of the purity, it's called Briotech. And so we use that and we do it the same. Like you'll do it 4 times a day, and you can spray that everywhere. You can even spray it on your eyes. You can spray it on the diaper area. So we use that along with it's a manuka honey. It's an organic manuka honey cream that we use topically, and that it's a really moisturizing. It also doesn't sting, and then we start a gentle probiotic and then a digestive enzyme. But in terms of topically, that's what we use to recreate what the Dr. Aaron does.
I love that, and thank you for sharing that. And I know you provided us with an eczema guide that goes over how to use that topical Briotech. So it kind of works a bit like an antimicrobial along with the manuka honey to address that staph infection. And this is something that people can order on their own. If the eczema is mild enough, they can utilize that. And that's over sheilakilbane.com/eczema guide, where people can get more information on that. Is that right?
Yes, yep, exactly.
Let's talk about some of the lifestyle changes. I know that there's a lot of controversy. I'll tell you what I was confused about. Detergents, right? So detergents can make eczema worse. I'm doing a lot of soaps. I know topical. Sometimes we would put topical creams, and the eczema seemingly would get more red, more inflamed. And what else was there? Baths. How often do you bathe kids? Do you bathe them all the time? None of the time? Bubbles, no bubbles? Could you walk us through some of these?
And it's interesting because we don't usually get into this in a huge amount of depth, because when you start practicing this way, the skin clears up so quickly. Again, it clears quickly, but it takes a long time in order to get that full long lasting healing. But in terms of baths, we always want to use a gentle organic soap. And really, what I always say is wash the critical areas. You don't necessarily have to be washing the whole body. And you can bathe. We always just have families however they've been bathing, whatever their routine is, whether it's daily, every other day, 4 or 5 days a week. That's completely fine. You just stick with what you're using. One of the other aspects of that is to be cognizant of your water. And we have had kids where some areas may have higher, the water quality might be different coming out of the faucet. There might be chlorine, there are things that can affect the skin, right? Some water is harder than other water, which can be more drying. So we do have some families that need to use a water filter, and there are a lot of different options, and you can get things that are fairly reasonable that will allow you to use filtered water if we need to use that for a little while. Most of the time those things are temporary until we get on the other side of the skin, but you really do want to be cognizant of the water for bathing and for drinking. So then in terms of detergents, that's always, we want to do something that is gentle. It doesn't have all of the dyes. It doesn't have all of when you look at most detergents, like if it's dark blue, if it's got a strong color, there's going to be an artificial dye in that. And we not only don't want the artificial dyes on our in our stomach, but we don't want them on our skin. So there are absolutely more gentle. If you can do an organic brand that also cleans your clothes, that would be ideal. But something a much more of a gentle, and we have a couple of recipes that you can use borax to, make your own detergent. But most of the time, when your kiddo is up all night scratching, to ask a mom or in a dad to make a detergent is, you know, all makes it clear. Like there are a lot of brands that you can get that are nice and gentle.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think the idea here is sometimes I know you want to do things the right way as a mom, and sometimes you can get really carried away where you are like, no bubbles, and no this, and no this, and no that. But really, when you get to the root cause, like the children's skin can actually transform. I know for Dimitri, I remember we were playing with like dish liquid soap, and that can dissolve, that could impact the skin barrier. And he was going to swim lessons and all of these things where we were like, we kind of paused a lot of the things and we did like laundry detergent makeover where we went through and bought soap based laundry soap and like washed all of his clothes in it to make sure it wasn't affecting his skin. And it was helpful. But once we got to the root cause, it's like I could put whatever on his skin and he could swim every day and like rub himself with whatever. And he doesn't have eczema. It's just like it transformed. So I think it's something to consider is like, there's things you can do on a temporary basis that can help, but don't get stuck there because sometimes it's like you remove all the foods and you try to keep your kid in a bubble, but that's not the answer. You want them to have like resilient skin, right?
Yes, yeah. And I just want it's that's a good example of sometimes we miss the forest through the trees. Is we're micromanaging all these details, but we're missing the staff, the gut health. And we one of our patients recently, a teenager, and the mom sent a message and said, you know what? She was able to go on spring break. She was at the beach. She swam in the pool. She swam in the ocean, and which of course is makes me so happy. And she said she wouldn't have even gone to do that stuff last year because she was embarrassed by how her skin looked, and she knew all of those things would have flared it up. So it's just a that transformation of the skin is really important with your ability, their resiliency for tolerating these activities that they weren't able to tolerate before.
Yeah, it's been a game changer. And for Dimitri, his favorite thing is swimming. Like that's his favorite sport or whatever you want to call it. And he loves it so much. He's really good at it. Like his swim coach was like, "Let's get him on a swim team." And it's at like 6 a.m., so I don't think it's going to happen. But yeah, it's just for a while I was like, "Okay, we can't put him in the pool. We can't do swim lessons." And that's just opened up a brand new world of possibilities for him because we don't have to worry about his skin, right?
And that's how you know whether it's asthma, eczema, allergies is you have a much when you start down this path, usually you're kind of walking on a tightrope. And anything that you do outside of that strict routine creates the flare up. And so what we do is we just get a much wider plank that the kids can walk on so that you can veer off and you don't have to live in a bubble, and you can do a lot more without having these flare ups.
Yeah, it's been awesome because it's opened up our world so much. And I mean, this was, I want to say, 4 years that he hasn't had eczema. I'm trying to remember the exact dates, but it's been amazing because his skin just it's transformed within a few days. Once we did some of this gut work, right? Um, and you are the queen of gut health, and it was so game changing. The work recommended that we do. Can you walk us through some of the things that you do with kiddos to support their gut and maybe that gut eczema connection?
Yes, yes. So, as we talked about earlier, we've got right back all of this microorganisms on the skin and in the gut, and they're talking to each other, and they each play a role in the health of the other. And with our microbiome in our gut, it plays a big role. The diversity of that bacteria plays a big role in our overall immune system and the way we synthesize vitamins, the way we absorb nutrients, the way we synthesize neurotransmitters, which are right, our dopamine, our serotonin. And we think about it kind of like a garden is it's we're weeding the garden, and we're not going in. And conventional medicine, a lot of times what we do is we go in and kill things, but what we're doing is we're saying let's make sure that we've got the right fertilizer, right? And fiber from food is really our big tool. Is vegetable nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruits, those foods contain fiber, and that feeds the good, healthy bacteria in the gut. So we use very specific and targeted supplements in a very specific order. And that I write about that in the book. And that's where it's you do one thing and we start to shift the terrain of the gut. And that's also where that work with Deb Allen, how she put things together with her children. That is the path that we're using when it comes to these supplements and at the beginning. So we're using we're using things to start to change that that makeup. And a lot of the bacteria, once you start to shift that, the good healthy bacteria feeds the other good healthy bacteria, and we start to just shift that balance while we get the skin clear. And it's an ultimately it's just it comes to a it's just like creating that good garden. One thing I will say too is what we see is it's important. Like we start with a really gentle single strain probiotic, and we've seen kids that will start with either a big strong multi-species probiotic or a different one called Saccharomyces boulardii is a good example. As if we introduce that too early in the process, that can trigger a flare. It may be a species that we need to add later in, but if we do it too quickly, it can cause the skin to flare up. So it's definitely a process. But if you're getting started and you're at home, I write about all of this in the book, and the eczema guide walks you through it, the eczema jumpstart guide.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the I know that some probiotics can actually increase histamines, right? Which is like the opposite of what you're trying to do.
And that initial the strain that we start with helps to clear histamine, that helps decrease our histamine levels.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I remember you also introduced me to um, systemic or proteolytic enzymes for kiddos. And you're like, you take this on an empty stomach. And I was like, how are we going to do that? And I remember we figured out a way to put them on cucumbers with a little bit of salt so that they can just be eaten without a protein containing meal. And that can be a really big game changer too for cleaning up some of the gut microbiome.
Yes. So the way that I like to think about the systemic enzymes. So we have over 3,000 or thousands of enzymes in our body, and about 25 or 30 of them are for digestion. And when we are using the systemic enzymes that we use, it they're going to get absorbed and they're going to help with detoxification, with nutrient exchange, oxygen exchange, and it's a really big support for the immune system. And it's the the I most of us in the office take them, and I actually take it every day because I have Hashimoto's, and I take a protease in the morning because you have to take your thyroid medication on an empty stomach. So I have a protease capsule in each of, I set it out for the week so that I'm taking that along with it. But it not only helps with the system, but it also helps with um oh my gosh, how did I oh, it helps open up biofilms. So it's right when we've got some not so beneficial bacteria in the gut, it creates biofilms around itself. And when we're doing those proteases on an empty stomach, those are going to help to open up those biofilms. So it serves several purposes, and it's really working with our body's natural function.
It's really interesting because they have helped so many people with pain and reducing thyroid antibodies, the proteolytic enzymes, and a little bit of protease. And eczema, there's a big root cause of these different infections. And I think a lot of times, when I've been trained in pharmacy school, it's like if you have an infection, you take this antibiotic or this treatment for it. But the tricky part is sometimes the infections can live in the biofilms, which is basically like a mucus based home where they keep themselves protected. Because we do know that you mentioned some of the different bacteria, like staph, can contribute to eczema. There's also protozoal infections and potentially fungal and mold colonizations that can be contributing. Is that right?
It can get pretty challenging if you're trying to say, okay, we're going to treat this one thing and this one thing and this one thing. Instead, what we do is we say, we're going to support the overall system and the function so that our own immune system can take over and address what needs to be addressed. I mean, of course, we do use antibiotics or antifungals or things if we need them, but often we're able to make the shift without having to go in and use some of those other treatments to, quote unquote, kill things. And it's what along the same lines, I think it's helpful. I remember being in residency, right? 20 plus years ago now. And the infectious disease doctor said, as he was describing antibiotics, he was right. So the antibiotics just bring the bacterial count wherever it is, whether it's ears, lungs, right? Potentially the gut or the skin. They bring that bacterial count down to an amount to where our own immune system can then take over and address the rest of it. So we can't, it's always the yes and we have to use all of the pieces of the puzzle so that we're working with our immune system, not against it.
Yeah, it's so important to consider all the tools in a toolbox. I know sometimes I in my circle of colleagues and friends and clients, there's some people that are very much like, some of my friends from pharmacy school that are like, this is voodoo. I'm not going to touch it. And then some of my more natural minded friends that are like, zero drugs. Every drug is bad for you. And it's like, when you've got a chronic illness or a healthcare condition, let's utilize every tool that we can in our toolbox to have some healing, right? And if you use medications correctly, then you're not going to have problems.
Yes, that's amen. And I am the first to say if we need a chest x ray and an antibiotic or, whatever, right? I wouldn't be around if there weren't. I've had all the things. And without conventional medicine, I would not still be here. And not that sounds dramatic, but right, I mean, I have even in terms of getting, I've been hit by a car, I've been thrown off of a horse, I've had, right, when I was younger, I used to get kidney infections and, right, have Hashimoto's now. But you can, when you support your system and you understand, what I always say is, if we understand our, about chemistry, physiology, the way our nervous system is put together, and that, for a parent, that just means pay attention to the signs, right? All of these, you know, this symptoms that we have are something to pay attention to. And my book helps to illustrate that.
I would consider you one of the world's leading functional medicine pediatricians. How do you think your own journey has shaped how you practice medicine? And what about your own journey got you into medicine?
That's overly kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to say two quick stories. Is the first one was just about eczema, and it's always because I've always listened to parents. I never, but every day's a school day. There was a pediatric surgeon when I was in residency who would always say that, and I adopted his motto: is there's always something to learn. And so when the mothers would tell me that they would do something and it worked, I always researched it, read about it, paid a lot of attention to it. And one mom, we'd been working with this kiddo for a while, and his eczema would get better, but it would keep flaring. And he was getting recurrent MRSA boils, so those methicillin resistant Staph aureus boils. So she ultimately found the Dr. Aaron topical and had started reading a dermatologist out of South Africa or out of Chicago. I think it probably was Peter Leo. I didn't realize it at the time, but she said, "You've got to get a hold of this Dr. Aaron." So she got his email address for me, and I emailed him, and we started corresponding. And so I prescribed the topical, even though I wasn't 100% sure. I needed to understand more how to do it, but Dr. Aaron was helping me and guiding me. And finally, we got on the other side of this kid's eczema. And so that was my one of my journeys. And that was, coming into functional medicine. My, I realized what a profound impact we could have on these more chronic childhood issues when we use the best of conventional and integrative medicine, and meaning nutrition, supplements, mind body therapies. And then when it comes, just for me, I did during medical school, right before medical school, actually, I was at Ohio State, and I got diagnosed with Hashimoto, with a hypothyroidism. And it was at the student medical center. And I can remember it because, right, thyroid disease is fairly common. But I remember the clinician at the student health center like opened up her book, and I almost felt like she was this is my recollection of it, what actually happened. I don't know if that's exactly how it happened, but she said, of all the things to get, this is the best one because all you have to do is take a pill for the rest of your life and you'll be fine. And I took it at face value and I was like, oh, lucky me. And, just started taking the medication. But I was going home now. I'd never been a napper. I was going home falling asleep. I actually had a little bit of a goiter. And then eventually, and it wasn't for probably 15 years after that, that I started to realize, oh my gosh, I should have gone off gluten and dairy the minute I knew about this. Could I have shifted things, and could I have prevented myself from being on medication still? And I don't know. And I've tried doing that, but I've not been able to get off the medication. But I consider myself to not have it's not something I think about very often because I feel great, right? I'm super physically active, and I have to, I'm off of dairy and gluten, and I do take many supplements. And I, I have to sweat several times a week in order to help my body detoxify. But once you know those tools, it's an absolute game changer, which you know intimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, it's always a challenge of I know that Hashimoto's can be reversed to the point where we don't have the symptoms and we can live a full and wonderful and energized and active life with plenty of brain function and maintaining a healthy weight and all of that. Sometimes, if your thyroid gland is destroyed and has been under attack for a while, then you're going to need to take some thyroid hormone, right? And oftentimes, you do need to take that. But I do know for most people, it's not the be all end all. It's like you need to have thyroid hormone and all of these lifestyle changes to feel your best, but it's always, like, fascinating for me when other conditions can be reversed, where you don't have symptoms of asthma or eczema. It's sort of like an ongoing journey for me being a pharmacist where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, you can absolutely reverse Hashimoto's." And then, when my son had eczema, there was this doubt in my head because I knew so many people that had eczema and kids with eczema, and they struggled with eczema and then became asthma later. And so it's been wonderful to be able to connect with you and be like, "Oh, wow, this can be reversed too." I almost don't believe it, but now I see, like, I've seen it with my own eyes, right? And a lot of the things you recommend for eczema are some of the things I would recommend for Hashimoto's anyway.
Yes. Yes, that's the thing, is because it's so foundational, it's we're building the strong foundation. It helps whether it's eczema, asthma, Hashimoto's, attention challenges, constipation, other gut issues. It's a it's a very like some of the talks that we do, we call it um, like pediatric immune resilience. It's a universal approach to some of the common childhood illnesses. But again, we say childhood because I'm a pediatrician, but it works. It's the same concept with adults.
I have had guinea pigs. I've had clients with Hashimoto's now that have had a lot of skin issues. And then I'll kind of take what I learned from you and I'll be like, "Hey, have you looked into this?" We'll do our Hashimoto's work with them, but then I'll also let them know about your work, and they've bought your books and they're not kids, right? And it still works for them really, really well.
I love that.
One tool that you and I have both used extensively, and I'm not sure if you're still using it, but it's the GI map test. Now, I was interpreting it differently, and then I learned how you interpret it. It was a bit different than I did. So there were certain markers I remember you had mentioned. For example, if H. pylori, even if you saw a little bit of it, you would consider that a positive test, whereas I would only consider it a positive test if it was like in the red. So there's been really, really interesting to see some of the differences. Is that one of the tools in your toolbox these days?
It is, and it is interesting because it's continuously evolving how we're using these tests. And as you know, we've got hundreds and hundreds of species of bacteria in the gut. And our research and our understanding of how to utilize this in clinical practice is evolving as we speak. And so even now, well, H. pylori is such a good example because it can be, kids can have it in their gut, and it's controversial whether it should be treated or not. And we actually, even though we absolutely always pay attention to it, we're not necessarily going in and treating. And we're usually supporting it with supplements, but we rarely go in and treat with the, quadruple antibiotic therapy that are used in conventional medicine. But it's that has been the study that we have used for years, and it continues to hold us in good, to that we like using that because we have just seen good results with it.
Yeah, I appreciate your approach because sometimes being a pharmacist, I tend to jump to like the big guns. Like if you've got an infection, let's bring out like everything. But with kids, that can be really, really overwhelming as well as with a lot of sensitive adults. So I know you can use very gentle things like zinc carnosine, for example, to help like an H. pylori infection and bring that to normal, right?
Absolutely. And it's we can use those when we support with those natural therapies, and we make sure that we have good motility, that motility and then the bile from the gallbladder, that is going to do a whole lot and more than anything, any pill or prescription or supplement we could use to keep the small intestine balanced, and the colon for that matter. I mean, the bile from the gallbladder literally goes into that small intestine and it pokes holes into the not so beneficial bacteria. And when you keep that, the bad bacteria at bay, that allows the good bacteria to flourish. But it really, we don't want to have, we want that small intestine to be fairly clear. Most what we're talking about of the microbiome and all these bacteria are in the colon. And it's the health of the stomach, right? Good, strong stomach acid, and then a lot of the food is absorbed in the small intestine, and then the colon is for excretion. But the health of each of them plays a big role in the whole. And when we have that good function of the pancreatic enzymes, of the bile, of the motility, that's really going to be eh, a huge role in keeping everything balanced.
I love that, and I know you also had recommend some very gentle digestive enzymes too, and I think those are mentioned in your eczema guide too.
Yes, absolutely. And that it function, and digestion, absorption. When you think about with kids, right, if we're talking about the really healthy cell walls and adults, fats make up our cell walls. And if you've ever had kind of compromised digestion and then you eat a fatty meal, you just get more indigestion. So if we're taking, most of the kids who come to see us are at a place of depletion and inflammation. So if we start just throwing it saying, okay, let's do some fish oil and some of these other things, we're going to just create expensive stool and urine. And so what we do is we get the gut ready, and it always involves using digestive enzymes because we want to fully break down those fats and absorb them. The fats make up our cell walls and they make up our hormones. And then we want to look at the proteins, right? Proteins make up our neurotransmitters and they make up our enzymes. So it's really important to have the basic resources we need, the natural resources we need to produce what our body needs to function.
I love that, and it's gentle and it can be very, very effective. And I know it's been really interesting for me just to see some of the patterns in people with Hashimoto's. I know a lot of times I'll see people that have hives and Hashimoto's and IBS, they might have something like the protozoa blastocystis hominis, and you can see that on a GI map test. Are you seeing any kind of like weird patterns with the kids that you're seeing with asthma or eczema of things that maybe aren't really out there in the research, but you're seeing clinically?
We will see the kids who are have a lot of inflammation, and this has been going on for a while, and they've been on a lot of antibiotics and maybe steroids. There's a dysbiotic section in on the GI map, and every that will light up like a Christmas tree. So many of the not so beneficial bacteria will be very high. And then we might see some of the autoimmune trigger bacteria elevated. And then when you go, plus or minus the yeast markers, we sometimes, even though we suspect they've got some imbalances in that realm, we don't always see it show up. But then you go, and there may be a parasite, and there may be some inflammation. We may see some fat, this steatocrit, that is actually getting spilled into the stool, and we don't want that. We want the fat broken down and absorbed. We might see a little bit of blood, which means inflammation. We might see the calprotectin a little bit elevated, and that's calprotectin is a sign of colon inflammation. We definitely don't want to see that. So that is something that we'll see that if kids have really severe constipation or if they have inflammatory bowel disease. And then the gliadin antibody, that's an antibody against the gluten molecule. And we always do blood work to see if we see any of the celiac antibodies elevated in the blood. And if those are negative, but we're seeing the gliadin positive in the stool, we will proceed typically with pulling them off of gluten at some point in time. Um, so it's there, we absolutely, and we use it as a guide. We're not going in and necessarily killing things, but we're using it as a guide to give us an indication of what's going on in the gut or on an overall standpoint.
It's fascinating. I know somebody recently was like, "Why aren't you sponsoring research studies on what's going on in the gut and Hashimoto's?" And I'm like, "Well, I wrote a blog about it, but it's amazing. There's so much happening in functional medicine, and sometimes people might hear, they're going to the research, or they might hear like, "Oh, this doesn't work. There's no connection between the gut and eczema," but you've done hundreds, maybe thousands of these tests, and you see these patterns, and I feel like it's important for parents to advocate for their kids and adults to advocate for themselves, right? When you've got some skin issues, autoimmune issues going on, and to really appreciate that you might need a deeper look, right?
Oh, yes, yes. And it's interesting, one of the dads in our practice who's a statistician whose child had eczema, they'd been to many different doctors, and he, has had a wonderful transformation. Is helping us kind of look to see if we can look at clinical outcomes, because that's the thing, is we're changing in a typical conventional medical research model. You're going to change one variable and look at the outcome. And what we're doing is we're saying, look, there is not a single variable. We've got to look at nutrition, we have to look at the environment, we have to look at the function, and we're going to change these different variables, but we're going to change them with a consistency in getting the function. And our foundation is the same every single time. And I'm sure you remember as we go back and we say, I know that you've done these other probiotics, but we have to start with this one because we've got to prime the system to get it ready for the next steps. And I would love to have big outcome studies, but people also have to realize that the pharmaceutical industries are usually the ones who are funding a lot of the studies because they have the money to do it. And there's no, right, the lettuce industry is not funding studies to show how green leafy vegetables enhance the microbiome.
Absolutely. And I know when I was in pharmacy school, which was many moons ago, it was like $1 billion to bring one new drug to the market. And I'm sure it's even more money now to do all of the, applications of research and so on and so forth. But I really appreciate you spreading the word that eczema and asthma and allergies are reversible, that they are not somebody's destiny just because it's in their genetics. Could you tell us a little bit more where people can learn about your work? I know you have a book for that anybody can get and help their children with. You have a practice, and then you also do mentorship for clinicians.
Yeah, so here the book I have my book, it's Healthy Kids, Happy Moms, 7 Steps to Heal and Prevent Common Childhood Illnesses. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold, and it's very detailed. The first 10 chapters is the science, the second section is the how to, and the third are recipes. And then we have an online course. We do take on a limited number of new patients each month in our practice, and we do mentorship. You can reach out to our office if you are interested in that. We do different cohorts of that. And so if you want to be put on the wait list, you can just send an email to support at sheilakilbane.com. And, we've got our supplement store and we've tried to put things together and we have a blog. We put things together so that it's as easy. You can start to figure out how to DIY at home if you don't have access to a practitioner. But you can always reach out to our office if you're able to travel to North Carolina for more individualized approach.
I so appreciate all the work that you're doing. And I also really appreciate you creating a free guide for people, the Eczema Quick Start Guide that people can get. We're going to link to that. And that way they can get started, get their kids started or themselves started on an eczema healing journey. I know personally going through the process, it was a game changer for my son. And I feel like even with some of the people will say, you mentioned focus issues and he was in preschool and he wasn't really interested in writing or whatnot. And then all of a sudden he was like writing his name and, doing a lot more like, preschooler work that I think that what was bothering him so much that he, wasn't able to focus. It was really, really interesting.
It's all that, right, that gut brain connection. It's all when you see it, and you just can see it more clearly with kids because it's right, we're always observing them. And it's I just I he did well, and you did a lot of work.
Yes, I didn't sleep for a few years. My brain is still recovering, but thanks to you, we got him sleeping, we got him less itchy, and we, like I said, his skin has completely transformed. He does not have eczema, and really, I just want to shout it from the rooftops. Like, if anybody has eczema or has a child with eczema, please, please, please check out Dr. Sheila Kilbane. She's got, her books, blog posts. You can go see her in person because you're really changing the world and you're really helping families.
You are super, super kind. I appreciate your sentiment. And you all, I just want everyone listening to know that there are so many things that you can do. So keep just start one step at a time.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you so much for offering so much hope for parents everywhere. And now it's time to do some of the rapid fire questions. One of them would be for you, is there a wellness hack that you've personally refused to participate in?
Oh, interesting. I'll say the wellness hack that I love is cold plunging. But the thing that I refuse to is I eat the food that works for my system, and I think that we've gotten into this thing of you should be grain free. You should be that we're sort of using and eliminating certain food groups, and we wear it like a badge of honor, or that it's this big thing. I would be eating all the things if I felt good on it. So I think that we are I think I think we should have as expanded of diet as we can and feel good, right? With being healthy. So I guess that would be the one thing that I would I would say that I don't I want people to, or that I'm not going to take continue to take everything. And I do some sugar, but try to limit it. But I don't. I try not to live in a complete bubble.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like elimination diets have a time and place. And definitely, I know in the Hashimoto's community, there was a trend for like the autoimmune paleo diet. And I think that can work really well. But I've also seen people on this diet for like 7 to 8 years that I've worked with where they come to me and they're so depleted and they have so few foods that they can that they can eat. And they're super symptomatic. And a lot of times we're like, but there's these other things that are going on in your gut. And if we actually address these other things, like one, you're going to feel better. And two, you're going to be able to eat more foods. Your thyroid antibodies are going to go down. And it's just like, I think when you over focus on on that. And I think that can be more of a wellness trend that can become a bit toxic. And, for me, like I said, it really broke my heart when I started seeing like this extreme elimination diet for eczema in kids. And I was like, I can't do this. And, I'm hormonal, sleep deprived, and want to help my baby, but I'm like, this can't be it, right?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
And I will say, I think you're the first person with Hashimoto's that likes cold plunges that's been on the podcast.
I laughed so hard at you had a post of you were like in all you had your down jacket when everybody else was in their t-shirts and all of the things. And that's exactly how I am. Like I am always have many more clothes on than everyone else around me. But for whatever reason, that cold plunge is I think it's of course it's the dopamine that I love, but it and I don't do it every single day. And if I feel anything, if I feel off, if I haven't slept well, I don't do it. But it just feels so good to me. I hate it going in, but I love it when I get out.
And I think it's an important consideration too, because your Hashimoto's journey and triggers might be different than another person's Hashimoto's journey and triggers, and you might be further along on your journey than somebody else. And so that something that is working really well for you right now, because I struggle with people being like all or nothing with things, where they're like, if you have this, you should never do this. Where I'm like, there's so many nuances here, but perhaps for most people, this isn't a great idea to start with, right?
For sure.
Do you have any guilty pleasures that aren't doctor approved?
Of course. I mean, who doesn't? The one I love, Prosecco, right? It's like it's a carbonated, it's an Italian, it's kind of like a carbonated white wine, but if we're, having dinner or something like that, that is my I always get an organic one, but it is I just love to have a glass of Prosecco.
And I guess, what do you wish more people would know when it comes to children's health?
Common sense is we are and not I mean that in a good way, is that we are being marketed to parents are everything that your child sees is to get so that companies, the food industry can sell more food. And whether it's fast food, whether it's sugar cereals, right? Millions and millions of dollars are spent on how to get people to buy these things. And we're because when we get a lot of a fair amount of grief in the integrative and functional medicine space for trying to get kids to eat healthy and depriving them. And I don't think that by not giving your child things that are not actually real food is depriving them. So we just have to think about what are we putting in our bodies and how, how can we really look at food with our kids without feeling too guilty as a parent and with again not living in that bubble. But there's a big difference between right a big bag of colored candies regularly and just having it every once in a while.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it can be a really for me, I've lived in Boulder, Colorado for a while, and it was like a really big culture shock. I actually now live in Austin, Texas, where there's like processed food everywhere. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like a really common part of the standard American diet.
Yes, and I think it's in schools, it's at every party, it's at so it's again, it's little by little getting your building up your arsenal of things that you're going to have or foods that you can take with you and um then maybe the friends that your kids have will start to do some of these things with you. Trying making it fun.
Yeah, we try to make it fun, and unfortunately, my son goes to a school where they have an awesome lunch program, so they have, like, organic food and wild caught, grass-fed, all the things, and, he's very aware of his body, so we let him have candy, but then we talk about, "How do you feel the next day?" And he's like, "Well, my stomach hurts," right? And sometimes when I have too much of this stuff, then I can't sleep. And we're very good about, talking about like, and what happens when we skip meals? And he's like, yeah, I feel kind of angry. So I think just giving your children, empowering them without of that awareness without being so restrictive, but letting them have a little bit of their own understanding or natural consequences and tuning into their own bodies, right?
For sure, because that to have that insight, right? I think many adults we don't have that insight with how food impacts us. And to start to help them to see that early on. I mean, I remember when I took gluten out of my diet, it was like somebody took a bag off my head. I didn't have brain fog. I didn't have energy slumps after I ate. My stomach felt better. I had been through conventional medical training and my integrative training before I figured this out. And if I couldn't feel that, how you're right, how is a kid and how is somebody who has no idea how food is going to impact them? So I love that you're helping him to see that now.
It's been quite a journey, and thank you so much for being a part of our healing journey, helping us in such a challenging time. We appreciate you and hold you in our heart forever. And thank you for being such a light for so many families around the world. And everybody listening, I hope this has been healing on your own journey.